So welcome to the Pangolin fibre sculpture project using the needle felting technique by me, Steph and Esther. So I just want to take you through my process for the pangolin. I previously have taken you through the process for the tiger in terms of how I pick the species or the type of the animal that I'm looking at and what things I've considered. Now this is useful for not only me sharing with you what I do, and hopefully you find that useful, or even if it's just from your point of view you want to understand where I was coming from, but it's also really useful for me because this is actually a really good documentation of what I've done, because sometimes I come back to a project many months or years after I've completed it, and I want to understand what I was absolutely thinking at the time, and recording is the absolute best way of doing that. So welcome to the Pangolin Project, and I've got a slideshow which I'm going to take you through and talk you through. So let's pop over to the slides, which you've seen the beginning one. So let's get to number 2. So knowing the pangolins and which type of pangolin. So we've got pangolins basically which I've split between the Asian or the sub-Saharan African pangolin, and you can see them here. The nice part here is you can see them according to the map and where they are. Now my geography is not good, so it's really good to have this as a reference from my point of view, because I can see exactly, because sometimes when in my head, you know, a creature is from Africa, you just think, oh yes, I know Africa. But it's quite good to see here, like the bottom 2, which are the ground pangolins. They're both from Africa, but when you look at they're completely different areas of Africa. And the white-bellied and the black-bellied pangolins, both long-tailed, also from Africa. But as you can see, the black-bellied pangolin is from a much smaller area within the area that the white-bellied pangolin. And then you go up to the Asian ones, and we've got Chinese, we've got Indian, Philippines. So yeah, basically they are spread about within those areas, and so that helps me to understand that. Also, this graphic helps me to, on a really basic level, understand the difference in the colouring and the sizing, because obviously the ground pangolins are going to be much bigger than the tree pangolins, and obviously the tree pangolins are going to have the longer tails because they need to help them when they're up in the trees, etc, etc. Anyway, so that is my first point of call to help me make my decision. So you can see here, you know, you've got tree or ground, there's nocturnal, the arbor, the size and the colour, all of those things. And then this particular drawing of them all, once again, just gets me to understand them a little bit more. Now obviously alongside this I'm looking at videos and I'm reading up about the pangolins and their behaviours, and whether some of them are nocturnal. As I say, some come out during the day, some are very much ground dwelling and create burrows for themselves, others live in the bottom, create nests in the bottom of trees and things. I don't know if nest is even the right word, but I start to, by reading all of that and looking at these pictures, deciding which species of pangolin am I feeling more connected to. Okay, so here I'm looking at the top, the Chinese pangolin. When I look at those, when I've looked at other pictures of those, that those scales on their head, they do almost look like a little helmet. It's amazing. Whereas when you look at some of the others, and in the drawing it obviously doesn't show it quite so much, so that's why it's really important to see videos and see them move and just sort of think, which one do I think I could do my justice to, do I feel connected to, because you have to feel some sort of connection because you're going to be spending quite some time with them. And so for me, I definitely was going towards the tree rather than the ground pangolin, so the smaller ones, and also to the ones which sort of had a furry belly, because that lends itself very much to the medium that I'm actually going to be using, which is fibres. And so basically it came down to the black-bellied African pangolin, which is also known as the long-tailed pangolin. Now, I know on these pictures they aren't all the black-bellied. There's a couple of white-bellied pangolins pictured, but it just helps me to understand a bit. But you see that one of the coming down the tree, you can see how when they're in that kind of climbing mode, that body is a nice little unit of armour, and then the tail, which is obviously much thinner than the ground pangolins, which have a very thick tail, and they're often known as a scaly anteater, because the black-bellied African pangolin eats ants and not all the others do. I also love the way they curl up, that one at the bottom where actually sitting, using its own protection, basically causing his own protection. Unfortunately, the protection doesn't protect them against humans. So it's really nice to be able to help. I know pangolins have probably been in the news quite a lot, some incorrectly to do with COVID, and others to quite rightly tell us about they're in danger of being extinct if we don't watch it. But I love also the colours of those scales, which are sort of black down the bottom and then come into this kind of gold. And they do look like pine cones, don't they, the way they... But that gorgeous little face and eyes and the ears. I love those cupped ears as well. And as you can tell, I'm feeling quite attached already, which is the way it should be, really. So the next thing is, what kind of pose do I think? Because obviously I'm going to start creating the piece, and I need to have an idea of the pose. And that bigger picture of the little pangolin on the back legs, because they have their tail, which obviously helps to balance, that's actually, it's quite nice because you can see the how the body can curve and create that lovely little body with his face and claws, and you can also see those fabulous claws. But I've put pictures of babies up here because I love the fact that the baby, I know that baby which is there is not a black-bellied pangolin, but even on the black-bellied ones, the little babies live for 3 months, about up to 3 months, by hanging on to the tail as mama goes about her business, which is just the cutest thing. And whilst cute is not always the best way to portray it, I do think it's quite a good way to bring the plight right into the forefront of our minds, because this is all about actually enabling the pangolins to exist and carry on, and to do that they need to produce babies in the next generations, etc, etc. Anyway, so I like to get to know them a little bit, and I'm kind of feeling like I know where I'm going with this particular sculpture. So moving along, as I say, it's a moment in the life of that I'm trying to portray, which will perhaps give the essence of this little creature. And I love this picture on the tree, because once again, that arched back shows how suddenly, you know, this long looking ant eater with scales, it shows how the bending and the arching of the back, suddenly you've got this more bodily shaped, the way with those arms scrunched up the front with the claws showing, and you can see how the scales react behind. Love that. And then I've got that little picture of the baby, because I really want to have a baby on the back of my little pangolin, and that's my vision at this moment in time. So when I start to create the armature, this is what I will have in my mind, even though obviously to start with I will just create a normal skeleton, not necessarily in that shape. I won't bend it into that shape until I've created a part of it. So I have to look at the skeleton. Now obviously quite different to the tiger in the sense that the tiger and the muscles were really important. Muscles weren't necessarily really important to this, but what is really important to this is to understand where that rib cage and everything is, because when we saw those scales and the bending of the back, obviously it's always going to bend up around the rib cage. That rib cage isn't really going to move an awful lot, and the stomach, and see how that tongue is way back there, so you can see how it's all going to go around that, and that makes sense from the pictures that we saw. So for me that's really important. What I will do is, you know, there's pictures of the toes and everything up there. I will go into it in much more detail for this particular species of pangolin, the black-bellied African pangolin, and find out exactly the toes, numbers, and what is quite different about this particular species. And that's when, as I say, I get obsessed with the different parts. But my first stage that I start with is this skeleton, and then I start to add fibre, and then I go into the rest of the details. But I've basically got my vision, I've got the species in mind, I've got my vision of what I would like to portray. So as we say, it's the next stage, which is just let's get creating, and I will come back and share with you very soon where I've got to. Speak to you soon.